Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And Remington James, someone who I basically joked about being a fake natty something like a year ago, who came in and tried to defend himself, has come out and admitted to his gear use. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, what's going to be funny though is that when I said that and he came in trying to defend himself, he was admittedly on gear at the time and had been on gear nonstop for I guess a couple of years and hadn't come off. It stayed on. So I guess that kind of proves me right. But I'm going to be critical of him, but by that same token, I always give credit where credit is due. I give credit where credit is due. I might not like a lot of what he's doing, and that's okay. We don't have to. I'm going to use him as possibly a negative example here, but here's what I am going to say. He did come out and admit to it. And when a person comes out and admits, hey, yeah, I was on gear all this time. I've used it for this. This is why I came off. This is the reason I felt I needed to use it. I can appreciate that level of honesty, and I will give a degree of respect for that because that is commendable. That is worthy of respect when the majority of the people on YouTube Fitness, the majority are fake natties, to come out and say, hey, you know, I was on gear back then. I was using stuff. I'm not on now, but I was all that time. This is why I did it, and to kind of talk a little bit about their own psychology as to why they started, why they stayed on, why they felt that they needed it. I'll give some props for that. Actually, Remington, I will actually give you a little bit of respect for that, okay? I'm going to give some respect for that because I think that's worthy of respect. Now, the problem we're going to get into, though, is that this kind of comes back to my point because he wasn't just using mild stuff. The side effects he described, the insomnia, the sweating at night, we all know that's from trim bologna sandwiches. We all know that's from trim bologna sandwiches. And usually pretty significant amounts when you're getting serious night sweats, insomnia, all of that. And what was interesting, you know, is that he showed where he was at, and even after he showed some of the pictures of when he had gone on for 20 weeks straight, multiple compounds, went all in, you know, he really wasn't that big. You know, he wasn't that big. Yeah, he had a pump all the time like you described, but he wasn't really that big. And we kind of come to that point of when he had been on for, I guess, a couple of years or so. It's back when I was kind of critiquing some of his squat videos and everything else, his inability to hit depth, even with a light weight. We kind of get to that point of this is a person who never built a strength base. And now he's shrunk. He says he's lost like 20 pounds of muscle. He's lean. The guy is lean. He's definitely lean. So I'll say his diet and everything's on point. So again, we're going to give credit where credit's due. Guy's pretty lean and everything. He's probably in pretty good shape. But in terms of just the strength and muscle and everything, he was weak and not big even when he was blasting. He wasn't big at all. And I think this is kind of the take-home that people need from all this stuff. And this is what I tell guys. You'd be surprised how many people are on at your gym. So when we start talking about fake natties and everything, yeah, there are people who are really impressive who are legitimately natty. They do exist. And I mean, I've highlighted examples over the years. I'll give you guys two examples right now of who you guys probably think are fake natties. My bro Nico Ella and Devin Palumbo. I know both those guys. I've known them for years and years online, many private conversations with those guys. They're very genetically gifted. Both of them started training at a very, very young age. You know, keep in mind, like Devin was benching 135 when he was 13 years old. Nico's the same way. The guy's been training really hard for 20 years, and they're both genetically gifted. So yes, they're freaks. But you know, good genes and starting training at a young age and keep maintaining it through your entire teenage years and adult life will tend to do that when you're genetically gifted. You know, those guys are freaks, and so you would look at them and say, okay, well, they've got to be fake natties. Well, not necessarily, because I think guys like that can be the exception, but those guys are relatively rare. You got guys like Remington. This represents your typical gear user, guys. This represents your typical gear user. Guys who don't really learn that much about training. They don't even learn how to perform the basic exercises. They don't build a strength base. They go on a bunch of gear, and then look what happens. He looked really lean. I'll give him that. The guy was lean and full, but where was the actual size? There was no size. There was no thickness. He had a little bit of traps, but there was just no thickness to this guy. Like, you're not looking at him thinking this is a big dude by any means. You know, and staying on gear long term. He wasn't cycling anymore. He was a long-term user struggling with 130, 315 pound squats. You know, again, no strength base. And so what ends up happening, it's what I always tell people. A lot of you out there who go on and then you want to come off, because I understand that. I've been there, guys. I've been there. You don't want to stay on it. Like at my age, to be honest with you guys, I'm turning 42 next month. I'm not going to blast a bunch of gear. I can't. Heart disease runs in my family. You know, there's a point where I had to decide when younger, hey, you know, even though I never used massive amounts, there's a point where you have to come off the stuff and be at a healthy testosterone and not push those limits anymore. And that's the reality of it. And I mean, I had to do that. And so I definitely understand guys wanting to come off, but then you see guys like him and then look, he's shrunk down to, he's tiny. Like he wasn't that big when he was on. Then he comes off and he's like, I've lost 20 pounds. Like you look at him and this is a guy who barely looks like he lifts. And I'm not trying to say that as an insult, but he is nowhere near his natural limit. And that's the thing. These substances change your natural limit. That's why I tell people, once you cash in your natty card, you're never natty again. You're never natty again because it changes your set points. It changes things like muscle cell nuclei density. There are permanent changes. So your actual genetic limit, your natural limit is not the same after you've been on for quite a while and you come off. You have the potential to be bigger than you could have ever been natural even years after coming off. That's reality. That's why I always say once someone cashes in that natty card, they're not natty anymore, right? You can call it whatever you want, but you're not natty. So you see him and he's shrunk down. And you know why? It's because he didn't build a strength base. So what I tell all you kids out there who say, well, I want to go in a bunch of gear. Well, did you build a base first? What do you squat? What do you deadlift? What do you bench? What do you press? And I'm not talking about necessarily testing your 1 rep max. I'm talking about calculating it off of rep work. You know, fine, you don't want to do a single. How many reps can you hit with 315 below parallel on a barbell squat? You know, how many reps can you deadlift 405 from a full reset? Right? I'm going to tell you right now, you can't do 7 or 8 reps of both of those. You have no business even considering gear. You haven't built a base. You know, you can't crank out 225 for 9 or 10 reps on a bench press. Or you can't bench 300 for a single. You probably don't want to cash in your natty card. I'm just going to be honest. You're not going to get the results that you want unless you go really hard. The guys who build an enormous base first, they build their strength, they build their work capacity, you're going to get a lot more out of it. And guess what? When people who build a base and then they choose to go on and they continue to maintain a proper strength base, when they come off, who do you think keeps a lot of their size? Who do you think keeps their size? The guys who get strong, the guys who build a base. And in my experience, and we can argue about whether high reps and lightweight and isolation work build muscle or not, they do. They absolutely build muscle. In my experience, observing the iron game for 2 decades, the guys who do fluff and pump when they come off the gear shrink the fastest. In my experience, a bunch of fluff work with high volume does not maintain muscle when you come off. It might build muscle just fine when you're on. In fact, naturals can actually put on a lot of size doing that stuff. I'm not arguing they can't. In my experience, it doesn't do anything to retain muscle for people who've been on gear who come off. You lose all your gains if you train that way, all of them. The guys who maintain the heavy, big compound movements, who focus on maintaining their strength and maintaining large amounts of tension on the muscle, are the guys who keep the most size when they choose to come off. And that's my anecdotal observation from 2 decades of watching the iron game, because I've seen this over and over and over. I've known plenty of guys who have been on for a couple of years who come off, and you watch how fast they shrink. You watch how fast they shrink, and the strong guys keep their size. Like I remember years ago knowing a guy who was like 40 something, and I was always shocked because the guy had a ridiculous physique, and then I found out he would come off for long periods of time, but he would keep all his size. But you know, we're talking about a guy who would rep 315 on the incline bench, right? Was repping 315 on inclines. The guy would do sets of 5 with 405 on the squat, ass to grass, when he was off. You know, talking about a guy who would do pull-ups with 100 pounds for rep work. when he was off. He maintained those big lifts. And he wasn't doing singles with them. He was, we did a lot of work up around, 6, 7, 8 reps with heavy ass weight on big exercises. And he would maintain his size. He would lose that sharpness. He would lose that fullness, but he was still jacked, even when he would be off for 6 months. And then we got Remington James here. He said he's been off 8 or 9 months, and he's down 20 pounds. And like I said, he wasn't drug big even when he was on. He wasn't. And now that he's off, you see him in a t-shirt. The guy's obviously fit. He's obviously in shape, but the muscle size isn't there. The strength isn't there. He just has never built a foundation. He never learned how to train. He jumped up, went on a bunch of gear because that's what the culture taught him that he needed to do. And I get it, man. You're going to make it in YouTube fitness. 90% of the guys in YouTube fitness are on. They're on trend. That is heavily abused in YouTube fitness, even by guys claiming natty. So when you're competing with that and you're trying to get those views and everything, I get it, guys. There's that desire to do that. But Remington James is a perfect example of what happens when you never bother to build a base and you just do a bunch of silly fluff and pump and you go on, and you're not a genetic freak. You're not Kai Green. You're not Phil Heath. And you think you're just going to stand around and do a bunch of cables and machines for high reps and never truly build a foundation, never build up the big lifts and get really strong and proficient at them. This is what happens. This is what happens. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.